Should I be off camera first?
No, you can be on camera.
Yeah, be on camera. What you see in my square, Ted, is what is going out to the world. So right now it's on a slideshow.
Oh, so I don't gotta do shit.
You don't gotta do shit.
Yeah, man. You got a handle on this.
It looks like we're live to Push Comedy Theater.
You can have like a degree in OBS now.
Okay, fuck yeah, looks good. All right, let me intro you.
No music. I'm just dancing.
Coming to you all the way from Norfolk, Virginia, earprov.com and Push Comedy Theater presents The Funny Pages.
Is there music under this? Welcome to the Funny Pages. I am Sean Devereux. I am going to be your host for this brand new show coming from the Push Comedy Theater, from Earprov, and from the Nerds of Comedy. For those who don't know me, my name is Sean Devereux. I am the co-owner of the Push Comedy Theater, and I am a huge comic book fan. And because of the pandemic, I don't get to talk comics with people as much as I like. So I decided to put all the resources, the tremendous amount of resources we have at the Push Comedy Theater. We dumped every last cent we have into this high production value TV show that is talk show coming your way, all about comic books. And today we have a very special guest joining us to talk comics, and that is Mr. Ted Cornista. Give it up for Ted. If we had canned laughter, or applause, you would be hearing that right now.
Well, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
And in the background, you have Matt Cole from Earprov. He is helping us out with all the technical aspects. You will be hearing him pop up throughout the show, I am sure. So thank you to Matt for helping me get this off the ground. So Ted, the Funny Pages is a show where we talk about comic books. I have been a comic book fan all my life. I was a comic book fan as a kid. I really started collecting comic books when I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. And I have a gigantic collection of probably 40,000 comic books that are sitting in a storage facility in Virginia Beach because my wife won't let me bring them into the house.
Right.
I had to make some concessions when I got married. She let me keep, I could bring some into the house, all my really favorite stuff I've brought, but the majority of my collection is locked away. But I put out a call to people who wanted to be on this show. What are heroes or books or story arcs that really kind of mean a lot to you, that not only your favorite, but there's just something about this hero or book or story arc that resonated with you? And you brought up the Super Sons, which made me very, very excited. So tell me, why the Super Sons? Or first, I guess before you do that, who are the Super Sons?
Well, Super Sons are Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, their children, their sons. And you just watch them throughout their adventures, and it's a very lighthearted tale. And it's a very, even like, from everything from the art to the lettering to it all matches the mood, and it's a very like a childish, happy book. It doesn't take itself too seriously, which it shouldn't. It's like they're training together, they're earning their capes because their fathers make them earn their capes in the very beginning of the arc, and they hate each other, and then they learn to like take care of each other throughout the book, and it's like seeing that progression. It's like, especially when you bring up like why I picked Super Sons, it's like you, I've been a comic book fan my whole life. And it's very rare when a comic book character is introduced into an already a very established universe, where it makes you love the characters that already exist there even more. So it's like,
go ahead.
So it's like, that's why I love Connor, because it makes you like Damian more for like how he develops as a character. He's developed more with Jonathan Kent, probably with the all his other rights combined, all his other storylines combined, he's probably developed most as a character with Jonathan, and other authors have picked it up, and like when you see when they're older and they're taking the mantles of their father, like they legitimately carry for each other. Like they draw it, and like the art, you can see like Damien's face as Batman, like actually scared for Connor, which you'd never see Bruce scared for Superman, but you actually see that for because they're actually friends, which I like to like.
So I agree with you. So I'm a big fan of the Super Sons. So Batman's son is Damian Wayne, who is his child with Talia al Ghul,
Yes.
The daughter of Ra's al Ghul, and he was raised by the League of Assassins. So when Batman first encounters him, he's about, what would you say, like 7 or 8 years old. He had no idea he had a son. So it's a 7 or 8 year old kid who's been raised by a group of assassins, and he is kind of an asshole.
Yeah, he's a rich kid.
He's a rich, spoiled kid who thinks he knows everything and has been trained since birth to be a deadly killer, a murderer. Yes. And then on the flip side, you have Jonathan Kent, who is, now the continuity on Jonathan Day has gone back and forth a bunch of times throughout the years, but currently he is the son of Superman and Lois.
Right, from the 90s.
Yes.
It's weird. It's hard to explain, but it's like they retcon DC Universe where everyone's about 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But then that Superman dies. But then our Superman comes from the 90s and says, everybody's wrong. I'm right. Like Superman always does. And he brings his little boy, which is kind of cool.
So my history with comics is, as I got older, I was a deep collector all the way into my mid-20s or so. And then when I moved out on my own and had an apartment and bills and things like that, certain things had to go. And a lot of that was comics. But I would come back and forth. So over the years, I would drop comics and then come back to them. So I came back to comics right at the end of the New 52.
Right. Okay.
And I believe at that point in time, I think Jonathan was the adopted son of Superman and Lois. He was, I think, General Zod's son at one point in time. Again, the continuity has changed, and then they got rid of all of that with the New 52. Mm-hmm. And after a few years of the New 52, they slowly started bringing in things from the old continuity.
Rebirth happened.
Yeah, Rebirth, which is the book we're talking about. So the Super Sons, you and I read the first arc of the Super Sons Volume 1 by Peter J. Tomasi, who is a really good writer. I was a big fan of his. I found him when I started reading Batman and Robin. He took over the Batman and Robin book right after Grant Morrison left, and I really liked his writing.
It's not as dark as Grant Morrison. And
no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I am not a big fan of the grim and gritty heroes. I think they have their place.
Yeah.
But my favorite superhero is Shazam, Captain Marvel, just because he is the antithesis of grim and gritty. So I agree with you. I really liked how kind of lighthearted a lot of times the Super Sons are. And you're right, they do not get along at all for the first, probably the first arc, the first 5 issues.
Probably the whole first 5 issues, they are not getting along, but they're learning to work together.
Yeah. Yes. And Jonathan has to go to school. He has to, he rides the bus to school. He has to do chores around the house. Whereas Damien just is shrugging off any responsibilities he has, unless it has to
go to school.
Yeah, unless it has to do with him being Robin.
Yeah,
right. So he disguises himself. He builds like a little contraction to make himself taller. He disguises himself as the bus driver of Jonathan's school bus, just because he has nothing better to do than come up with this elaborate disguise and these things so he can work the pedals because he's pretty short. He shows up at Jonathan's house, like, at 2 o'clock in the morning, just to pull pranks on him. He's a really kind of fun, like, for those of you who don't know, my business partner, Brad McMurrin, he is my best friend, my business partner. But when we first met, we hated each other with a passion. It was probably for a good year before we moved from bitter enemies to friends. And even to this day, there are times when he and I can have this kind of knockdown, drag out fights that just pop up out of nowhere, kind of like brothers. I think brothers do that a lot. They can be best friends, but they know exactly what buttons to push with each other. And
right.
Jonathan and Damien definitely know the buttons to push.
Yeah, and I like their arguing. It's just always childish. It's like Jonathan always argues, "Well, I'm taller," and like I'm older. And then Damien responds, "I'm older," and it's like that's what we argue about as kids. Like I hear our kids argue about it all the time now.
And Damien is a member of the Teen Titans, which really kind of rubs Jonathan the wrong way because he thinks he should be a member of the Teen Titans as well. Another cool thing is their fathers. Batman is okay with Damien being Robin, but only under certain conditions. Batman is very strict about when Robin can go out and fight crime and things that he has to do before that can happen. But Superman really does not want Jonathan to become a superhero, at least not at the moment.
And it's weird, their relationships between the two. It's like Jonathan's yes sir, no ma'am. He trusts Jonathan, he lets him out, but Damien's such under lock and key, and he still comes out and sneaks out and does whatever he wants. Such different styles. And it's funny, like rich kid, poor kid.
And how rude he is to Alfred. He's incredibly rude to Alfred. But Alfred just kind of puts up with it, which is kind of funny.
Which makes me assume Bruce was like that as a child. It's like.
Yeah, probably at some point in time, I could see Bruce kind of being a snot-nosed little kid, whereas Jonathan is kind of your goody two-shoes. He's the one throughout all this is very worried that they're going to get into trouble.
Right.
Is always worried, what their fathers think.
Very oblivious to how the world really works. Optimistic.
Exactly.
Happy. Like, I don't know. I like reading about characters like that. He's the best.
I do too. I do too. So that's not to say there isn't some darkness in these books. So the first story arc, they are fighting Kid Amazo. Amazo is an android that has all the powers of the Justice League. And at some point in time, there was a virus that gave regular people superpowers, but Lex Luthor was able to come up with an antidote to remove all those powers. But there is one family who didn't lose their powers. So the government has kind of locked them away for their own protection.
And Luthor's in the league. He's a good guy right now. So
in this continuity, Lex Luthor is a semi superhero. He's still a pompous jerk.
Yeah, only one that knows is Superman, of course.
Yes.
Who else buys it?
But this Kid Amazo has gone completely cuckoo. He's like having all these powers and being locked up. He's kind of snapped and starts murdering his own family. We come to find out later that they're actually androids as well. So he's not technically murdering anyone, but is pretty much
a little bit.
A little bit, but psychologically torturing his family just because he's able to retain his powers, and his powers are more than his family's, and just is kind of lording it over them. And he comes into contact with Robin, and what do they call? I can't remember. Do they call Jonathan Superboy, or do they just call him Jonathan?
They call him Superboy, or Jonathan, or what do they call him? Super Brat? Well, that's just what the villains call him. I don't know. Yeah, they call him Superboy.
So like I said, there is some darkness with the villain. But the story is not really about them overcoming the villain. It's them learning how to work together.
Right.
Which they do. But by the time they defeat the villain, their fathers have been alerted that they've snuck out of the house and are fighting crime. And I think that the last issue, so we read the first trade paperback, which is 5 issues. And Matt, you can start throwing up the covers to these if people want to kind of see what they look like.
Kid Amazo.
Yeah. But the issue number 5 is they get locked in the Batcave, and their fathers pretty much tell them to kind of like fight it out. Like, you know, you're going to stay in here until you get along. And I think it's at the end of that issue where they both kind of earn this respect for each other. Yeah, exactly. And earn their capes.
Yeah. Like they faked an injury or something. And then when they got back to the Batcave because they failed the mission. Right? The first arc.
Wait, did they fail the mission or did they?
Well, they didn't fail to work together, so they had to walk home.
Oh, that's right. They had to walk. Yeah, they had to walk home.
Back home that day.
Yeah.
John can't fly yet.
Yeah, he can leap tall buildings, or he can leap very far. But much like Superman, when Superman first showed up.
Yes. Silver Age. That's Silver Age.
Even though Golden Age, going all the way back when Superman first showed up in Action Comics #1, he could. That's how they get leap tall buildings in a single bound, because he wasn't really
that's right.
flying. So the Super Sons. So they have gone on. Peter J. Tomasi has written a lot of their adventures.
Yeah, he wrote all the way to volume 4, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Volume 4.
And then you can find Super Sons volume 1, 2, and 3. There's also Adventures of the Super Sons. Definitely check it out. Go to my favorite comic book shop, Local Heroes in Ghent, is really good. But yeah, definitely wherever you get your comics from, check out the Super Sons. It's really kind of a fun, like you said, lighthearted.
Yeah, it's a happy too, because everything else is kind of depressing, but in reading this is like happy.
Which again is kind of so as we go on with this show, people are going to start to figure out what my likes and things that I don't like as far as comic books. And one of my favorite kind of era of comic books is the golden age of comics, because things were a lot more innocent back then. And then even getting into the 50s and 60s where you could do kind of goofy things in comic books and get away with it, which is what's going to lead us to the next portion of the Super Sons. I see in the chat, Will Harris, a good friend of ours, has asked us about the original Super Sons.
That's right.
Which is what we are going to talk about next. So so for those of you who don't know, even though in modern continuity, the Super Sons have only been around since 2017, there have been Super Sons before this. And my first introduction to anything like that, I have this book right here that I've had for many, many years. It's called Batman from the 30s to the 70s.
That book sounds crispy.
It is very crispy. It came out in the late 70s. And I actually, I stole this from the library, from the Lynn Haven Junior High School library, because it still has the card in the back. And literally for 3 years, I was the only person who ever had checked out this book. So on one of the last days of school at junior high, I stole it, which, saying it out loud, I'm not very proud of. But I have read the heck out of this book. I mean, it's literally falling apart.
Yeah.
But in that book, they had a story, and it's called The Second Batman and Robin. And it's the second Batman and Robin team, and you really can't see it that well. But in it, Alfred is for fun, just writing short stories, and he writes a story about what it would be like if Batman had a son. So Robin would grow up to become Batman, and Batman's son would grow up to become Robin, and they each had like Roman numeral 2 underneath their emblem, so people would know that it's Batman 2 as opposed to the original Batman. So that was the first time that they started playing around like with these kind of what if scenarios. And then from there, this is a book, one of my pride and joy. The glare is going to be tough. From 1964, it's World's Finest, which was a book. And I believe, Matt, do you have the cover of this? Can you pop up?
That's in great condition.
It is pretty good. So it is the first meeting of Batman Jr. and Superman Jr. And this is definitely prefaced in the title as being a what if. What if Batman had a son and Superman a son, and these two kids met? And it is definitely a fun story. I believe I sent this to you to read.
Right.
Yeah.
It's easy.
It's interesting. So in this, Batman marries Kathy Kane, who was Batwoman at the time in the late 50s, early 60s, and Superman marries Lois Lane. And it is it's a very of its time book, I would say, is the polite way of saying it. Is incredibly sexist. Lois Lane has to give up being a reporter in order to raise kids, and Batwoman has to give up crime fighting as well. And the wives don't really get along that much. They take pot shots at each other.
They do.
They have a double wedding, and Batman and Batwoman, they honeymoon over in Europe and are traveling all around the world, where Superman on his reporter's salary can't afford to get a honeymoon for Lois Lane. So she's very bitter about that. And they show them having like dinner parties and things. And Batwoman will always bring up is like, it's so weird that Superman hasn't shown you his Fortress of Solitude. Batman,
right? It's so funny. That made me laugh like really hard when I read that.
Little digs at each other. But the weird thing is that the kids, Batman Jr. and Superman Jr., walk around in their superhero outfits.
Yeah, their dad's uniforms.
Yeah, their dad's uniforms. And so at one point in time, they get into a fight over which dad is the best superhero. Mm-hmm. And little Superboy or little Superman Jr. pushes Batman Jr. and sends him flying. But because he's been trained as an acrobat, he doesn't get hurt. But the moms decide that they can no longer hang out anymore.
Right.
And Batman Jr. and Superman Jr. are afraid that because of their fight, it's going to break up their father's partnership. So they pretend to run away so their parents will be worried about them and forget all about their little squabbles and stuff. And they get into their own little adventure and eventually save the day. And by the end of the story, everybody has made up. But it was definitely said at the very beginning that this is a imaginary story, which again, saying out loud, imaginary story, because they're all imaginary stories. But this is definitely a what if type of story. And this is 1964. And then about, 9 or 10 years later, in the 1970s, they decided to bring the Super Sons back in World's Finest. It was World's Finest number 215. It came out in 1973. And this time, Batman Jr. and Superman Jr. are in their late teens, probably even early 20s. They're kind of hippies. You can see there, Batman Jr. is wearing some really kind of nice, kind of bell-bottom 70s pants.
They got the sideburns going.
Yeah, they got the sideburns going. They have the most, it was probably even dated at its time as far as like lingo, using slang words and stuff like that.
A spiritual
Um,
brother.
yes.
Yeah.
And, hippies and, get off my back, old man. So they are very angry at their dads. They think their dads have been holding them back.
Very get out my room energy.
Very, very much. Yeah. You don't understand me. You're so out of
Woo!
touch.
Yeah.
But the thing with this is that at the beginning of this story, there is no caveat that this is an imaginary story. So if you are a person reading World's Finest Comics, which again, every issue was a team up between Batman and Superman. If you're reading World's Finest Comics, one issue you have Batman and Superman, and then the very next issue, out of nowhere, you have Batman Jr. and Superman Jr.
Right. Yeah.
with no explanation to where these kids have been up until this time.
And the cover is so morbid. Do you have the picture of the cover, Matt? Like
where they're tearing up the poster of their.
Like, oh yeah. Okay, never mind. I think it's next issue.
Next issue where but we'll get that to in a second. So but yeah, this would go on for about 10 years. They would make sporadic appearances for the next like 7 years or so. Make sporadic appearances in World's Finest Comics where they will just pop up out of nowhere. No explanation given really as to where these super sons have been. And this is pre-internet. So there are no like there are not a lot of fanzines out at that point in time, or
no backlash from fans to tell them.
I don't even know if there was backlash from fans. That's the weird thing is that it's just these two kind of angsty hippie versions of Batman and Superman going out across America fighting crime. But the stories are really weird. And nobody really comes out looking good in a lot of these stories. In the first one, and Superman Jr. and Batman Jr. are kind of jerks. But then again, Batman and Superman are kind of jerks. So again, like some of the other stories we've talked about with the Super Friends or Super Sons, Batman and Superman don't think their kids are ready to be superheroes. And that's where a lot of the tension comes from. But their very first adventure, they go out to some city on the West Coast to take down this Asian gangster.
Yeah, Rocco?
Yeah, Rocco.
The villain names were so funny to me. Just sounded so of the time, like Rocco, and super Italian name, whatever. It's like that's the bad guy.
So the dads have so little faith in their sons, and they don't want there to be any collateral damage or anything like that. Superman flies out to where this city is on the West Coast, punches the San Andreas fault so hard that it causes it to vibrate, which creates a duplicate of this city.
Just
that
like life.
The duplicate of the buildings, duplicates of the people. That way, when the sons go to this town, and there's a good shot of Superman punching the San Andreas fault and causing it to ripple. And then Matt, the next issue, you can actually see the city vibrating into existence.
I like how these guys are always on a motorcycle. Like
they travel around on a motorcycle.
They're like on a bike, just one bike. They couldn't afford another one. No helmets either.
So they are able to they take down this gangster. It turns out the gangster is actually captures the Super Sons because Superman is not as strong as his father, and Batman Jr. is not as doesn't have the skills as his father. But the gangster's son gets fed up with his dad and all his dirty dealings, and it caused his mother to die of a broken heart, that the gangster's son kind of turns on the father and rescues the Super Sons. And The father tries to run away and falls and hits his head and dies.
Just like $1 Million Baby.
Yeah, just like $1 Million Baby. But what is weird is that for all intents and purposes, these are real
canon stories.
People in this town that's just been punched into existence. So much so that, the son is really upset, with everything that his father has done. And then of course is upset when his father dies. Like he didn't want his dad to die. You actually see him crying.
Yeah.
And at the end, you see a scene with Batman and Superman. It's like, wow, the kids did all right for themselves.
Looks like the boys.
And luckily, this other town will just fade out of existence in a couple of hours. So Superman literally created a city with all these people that he knew that they would just end up dying in about 6 or 8 hours when they fade out of existence. I mean, it is the epitome of somebody being a god,
right?
Just creating and destroying life on a whim.
Just because. One of the things that really that caught my eye with these older books especially is how everyone almost kind of looks like the same dude with glasses or a different outfit. It's just the same kind of loose fitting, loose fitting underwear outfit they got.
I had a hard time at some points in time telling the difference between Superman and Superman Jr.
Yeah, it's just a different white guy with the same different hair.
Yeah. Sometimes the artist would make the sons a little bit shorter than their dads, but not all the time. It's just a lot of lazy artwork going on.
Back then was all about deadlines, though, I guess, and there was not a lot of time for editing. Because I remember watching a giant documentary about old comics, it's about getting them out.
Yeah, it's definitely about getting them out.
So it kind of sucks sometimes.
But the more you read these stories, the more just how screwed up some of the thinking. So there's another one, World's Finest 222, where a tribe is discovered that has had, in this tropical jungle, that has had no contact with man.
Cavemanish people.
Very kind of cavemanish type people.
Look at that shit. Look.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Just push that man right up. Apache Chief just gone.
And although the cover is not that far from the actual story, so the premise of this story is that a scientist wants to go and study these people who've never been corrupted by man.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a rival scientist who thinks that man is inherently evil, and he wants to study them as well because he thinks it's only a matter of time before the evil that is in every man will start bubbling up, and this tribe will turn on itself. And Superman Jr. goes with the first scientist. Batman Jr. agrees with the second scientist that there is evil in everybody and goes off with him. But for the second scientist, it's taking too long for the tribe to turn on each other. So he starts planting these devices that emits these noises so they can't sleep. He releases insects into the environment to destroy their crops.
Dirtbag moves.
Some dirtbag moves, which leads Batman and Superman or juniors to getting into fights with each other.
Yeah, the waves or something are making them turn against each other.
Yeah, exactly. And then they decide that the bad scientist decides to send Batman Jr. to kidnap the leader of the tribe, because without their leader, then they'll definitely turn on each other, which Batman tries to do, but the tribe leader kind of kicks his ass.
Apache Chief, man.
Yeah, exactly. And this frustrates the evil scientist so much that he punches the tribe leader, and the tribe leader kind of shoves, or even you can see here, headbutts the scientist, and the scientist falls into lava and dies. And this pisses off Batman Jr. so much that he's now going to throw the tribe leader into the lava as well. Matt, if you go to the next panel, yeah, he literally is going to throw him into the lava and is saying stuff like, an eye for an eye. You're a murderer.
This here is first-degree murder.
Yeah. And it's one of those things like Batman Jr. is kind of a dick.
Right.
He's literally destroying this whole
uncorrupted nation.
Yeah, this whole corrupted nation. Then because of all the stuff that they've been doing to the ecology, there's this big earthquake, and the tribe leader ends up saving Batman Jr. from falling in to this crevice that forms, but dies in the process. And then Batman Jr. learns his lesson. This tribe is completely wiped out. Their leader is killed.
Villains didn't last long back then at all. they were all just dead in the same issue. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it really is crazy. And there's just a lot of this weird stuff. There's one issue where Batman dies and Batman Jr. and Robin fight to see who's going to be the next Batman. But then it turns out that Batman didn't die. He just faked his own death to, as a test.
Classic Batman.
Classic Batman. But let his entire family go through, the funeral and the reading of the will. Because that's the thing, they never show in these Silver Age stories. They never show. In the first one, they showed Kathy Kane and Lois Lane as the wives, but once you get into the 70s, they never show the moms. It's always from the back, or there's always a shadow, so you can never see their face. So you never know: is it Lois Lane? Is it Selena Kyle? Is it Kathy Kane? Is it any of the women that Batman has romanced over the years? But there's this great scene where they're in a lawyer's office with the reading of the will, and like Alfred gets $20,000 a year is what Alfred ends up getting.
He's like, I get my salary?
Yeah. Which I guess in 1974 that was a lot of money, but because Alfred is extremely happy about that much money. He was very impressed with that. But you see the thought bubbles, and all Robin and Batman Jr. are thinking about is like, who is he going to leave the bat suit to? Yeah. And are upset when it's not mentioned in the will. And starting to think that would be a really bad crime fighter if you bequeath in your will that, an everyday lawyer and that anybody, who works at the court system can pull up to see who you're going to be bequeathing your costume to.
Yeah, it's all used.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got stains on it. Get a new one, bro.
But so yeah, just a really a lot of just crazy type of stories in this era. And again, every single one, there is no disclaimer ahead of time saying this is imaginary story. So they would, again, between 1973 and 1976, they would pop up 2 or 3 times a year. So like the next issue, they'll pop up for an issue, and then you won't see them for another 4 or 5 issues with, again, no internet, no comic book.
And they didn't mention
websites.
Put in the books, right?
Yeah, exactly. No little. A lot of times they'll have editor notes where like check out this issue for. But for some reason, when I was a kid, I got this World's Finest when I was probably 15 or 16. I actually found it. It was like at a flea market. It wasn't even at a comic book store. So I might have paid $2 for it. The person selling the comics were just getting rid of them. They didn't know how much they were. And I thought it was really cool. And then a couple years later, I found one of the other World's Finest from the mid 70s. And my Bible back when I was a kid was the Overstreet Price Guide. So I would start looking in this to find any other mention in when they started giving the prices of like all the world's finest comics,
Mhm.
any other mention of Super Sons, so I could start tracking those down, because there was really no way of finding which
Right,
issue
right.
had Super Sons, because there were no websites, there was no Wizard magazine, there was nothing like that. It was
Right.
just a lot
They
of
were just
research.
there when they felt like it.
Yeah. Me asking the owner of Trilogy Comics if he knew about the Super Sons, and him looking at me like, why are you wasting my time, kid? But there, like, again, so they had really kind of cool adventures. They go to one town that is populated entirely by women. And that there's not a lot of characterization in these, especially compared to the modern day comics. But the one thing they do is Batman Jr. is kind of a playboy. He's always hitting on any woman he comes across.
That's right.
But the women are only interested in Clark Jr. or Superman Jr. Batman Jr. gets no action in any of these. But they come across a town full of women, and again, very sexist, calling the girls dames and dolls. And
Right.
at one point, I think Superman Jr. says, like, you know, how can you raise a family and children, or how can you have a family and raise children without men? Just really kind of crazy stuff.
It's for that time, I guess. It's just
Yeah, again, it is of the time.
Yeah.
There's another one where they meet Lex Luthor's daughter, which
I
is
didn't read that one. I didn't read that one at all.
yeah, that was issue 238. They meet Lex Luthor's daughter, who grew up thinking her dad was kind of a hero,
Right.
and wrongly imprisoned by Superman and Batman. So she concocts a plan to break him out of jail, and as the ultimate irony, unwittingly gets Superman Jr. and Batman Jr. to unwittingly help her break her dad out of prison. But then she finds out that he is actually really a bad guy, so helps them get locked back up.
Away in prison by the end of the issue.
Yeah. So again, so throughout the 70s, Superman Jr. and Batman Jr. would pop up, and then around 1976 or so, they kind of disappeared until 1980, which was the final appearance of the Super Sons. And all the Super Sons stories were written by Bob Haney, the one from 1964 all the way up to the mid 70s, were all written by this guy, Bob Haney, who created the Teen Titans, created Metamorpho. He had a long run on Aquaman's comic book. But he left World's Finest, and Denny O'Neil, who is best known as a Batman writer and editor, came on board as writer. And I guess he'd been getting a lot of letters like, hey, when are the Super Sons coming back? When are the Super Sons coming back? And he hated the Super Sons with a passion. Thought they were he thought they were stupid. So he decided to put an end to the Super Sons. So in this issue of World's Finest, you have Batman and Superman hanging out in the Fortress of Solitude.
This issue was sad.
It was really sad.
Really sad.
And you had Superman has created this computer program to simulate what their sons would be like if they actually had sons. And Batman is like, well, this is all well and good. It's kind of cool to see, you know, what our sons would be like if we had them, but we got crime fighting work to do. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
And they leave the computer program running. And at some way, shape, or form, the Super Sons realize that they're in some sort of simulation and are able to build a device that lets them leave the computer into the real world. And they go flying, you know, to Gotham and Metropolis. They have this meeting with Lois Lane when Lois Lane finds out that Superman has a son, and she breaks down crying because I guess she realizes that Superman's been stepping out on her or what, I don't know. but whatever they did to get out of the computer has caused them to emit this radiation that is like destroying buildings and stuff wherever they go. So Batman and Superman show up and they have a fight, and they finally bring the sons back to the Fortress of Solitude, where they say, you're the cause of all these problems that are happening. The only way for us to fix this, if you guys kill yourselves by jumping into the disintegration pit.
How can you say that to your son? It's like,
yeah,
I want to believe you're my son, you're not. This is super fucking sad.
Really sad. And again, really completely cold-hearted on Superman and Batman's part. Like, they don't even like do any other tests or anything like that. The second they get back to the Fortress of Solitude, is like into the disintegration pit with you. Which is weird that Superman has a disintegration pit just lying around the Fortress of Solitude.
Just in case.
And it's really sad. The sons kind of say, it's like, well, I mean, I guess if you guys, don't want us, there's really nothing for us to live for. And they voluntarily walk into the disintegration pit and die.
And then you just see this one small little panel of like Clark and Bruce just looking so depressed.
Yeah, I think Bruce Wayne or Batman might even have like tears.
Right.
Because from the get-go, he's had wanted nothing to do with any of this. Like even when Superman is showing Batman the program that he's created to show what their sons would be like, Batman's like, yeah, whatever. Which also weird that this is what Superman does in his free time. It's kind of like, it's like fanfic where he's shipping, like, I wonder what it'd be like if Lois and I had a kid, and now let's write stories about it.
Oh, Bruce would have so many. Where'd you get the parts for this?
Yeah. So a super, super sad end to the Super Sons. That was 1980, and then you would not really see or hear about them until 2017 when they made their glorious comeback.
This is how many years is that? Like,
I was told there would be no math. I think it's like almost 37 years.
And I think fans actually asked for it to come back also.
Yes, there was one
big demand for fans to bring back Super Sons.
There was an issue. There was a book that came out in the mid to late 2000s. It was an Elseworlds book. It was I think it was called like the 80-page Elseworld Giant, which Elseworld, by this point in time, DC wised up and realized that if you're going to have, you can do these kind of imaginary out of continuity stories as long as you put them in under the Elseworlds label. And if I'm not mistaken, they found an old Bob Haney story that he had written about the Super Sons. So there was a Super Sons story in that book, but not a lot of people got to see it because there was also a Plastic Man story, or no, a baby Superman story in it, where I think comes across like a cigar that he takes a puff on or something. Again, it was played for comedy, but anyway, a lot of parents people were up in arms that baby Superman was smoking. So DC had to recall all these books and shred them. So only a few copies ever made it to comic book stores, and they're actually worth quite a bit of money nowadays. So nobody really got to see the last Super Sons story that was written before they jumped into the disintegration pit.
Just because they had to show off how cool smoking is, I guess.
So that is the saga of the Super Sons. They've been, believe it or not, they've been around for over 50 years, from 1964 until today. So Ted, if you were going to recommend to somebody, like, where would you go? What would you recommend people check out when it comes to the Super Sons? Because we just read, as far as the new version, we just read their first trade paperback, but they've been making a lot of appearances throughout the DC universe as of late.
For the most recent stuff, I think Dead Planet is really, really good. You don't really gotta know anything. Just start off with Dead Planet 1, and it's one of those things where you can pick it up and read it. I don't want
Is that the deceased?
yeah, Deceased. It's the second part of it where everyone gets older.
Okay.
So John and Connor are not John the same guy. Connor and
Damien.
they're Batman and Superman now. They took over their mantles, and you see that relationship just from when they were kids evolve. And it's just a really good story all around.
And again, so the deceased is
For more John and Connor relationship wise, but anything Super Sons Volume 1 by John Tomasi and
Peter Tomasi, yeah.
Peter Tomasi and Tom Taylor. Like if you got no, Jorge Jimenez
As the artist.
Yeah, Tom Taylor did Deceased.
So for those who don't know, Deceased is again, it's kind of like an Elseworld style, which is kind of out of continuity, where this kind of virus is turning people into zombies. It's kind of like the DC's take on zombie apocalypse.
It starts out where everybody that's looking at a screen becomes a zombie.
Yeah, so anybody looking at a phone or a computer screen. So I mean, it automatically wipes out most of the population, and a lot of the superheroes in general, like Batman, becomes
done right
zombified.
away.
Yeah, right away.
So it's a really good read, and you don't really got to know anything else. So if you're new to comic books, I just suggest that. But if you want to get into it, I think Rebirth Superman Volume 4. I don't know exactly what issue. This is when John and Peter meet. John and Damien. I keep calling all these other names. I don't like Damien's name, I guess.
For my go-to, I would say if you want to find out more about the Super Sons, the Silver Age Super Sons, the 70s version of the Super Sons, they got their own trade paperback that collects all their stories. And it's called Saga of the Super Sons. You can find it on Amazon for pretty cheap, maybe $15. Or you can get it at one of your local comic book shops. It's still in print, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said, these are really fun stories. They're completely and utterly wackadoo stories. This guy, Bob Haney, he did not give a crap about anything. If he wanted to write a tale about a town full of women that are controlled by aliens, he's going to write that. If he wants to write a story where, now there's another great one where this bubble descended over this town in the 1800s, and nobody in that town aged, and they pretty much stayed in the Old West, and the Super Sons stumble across this town, and again, really crazy stuff going on. This guy had a hell of an imagination. Not a lot of it made sense, but it's still a fun read, and the artwork's really pretty good. Oh wow! So I bought this when I was living in New York because I just found my Metro card I was using as a bookmark. Yeah. So one of the last times I was in New York, I had this book with me.
That's an old Metro card.
July. It was a day pass. So July of 2011.
Oh, that's why it's white, huh?
Yeah. July 25th, 2011. I was in New York reading the Super Sons on the subway.
Nice.
So is DC sort of like DC trying to do Marvel? So yeah, so we've been talking, and I haven't been paying attention to the chat. Is DC's kind of like the Marvel, their answer to Marvel Zombies?
Yes, I would say so. But it's like,
and they've had two series. So yeah, so the first one, and now the second one, isn't there a time jump? Because the first one, I've read the first series, I haven't read the second one. Connor and Damien are kids in the first one, but then the second one, there is a time jump.
Yeah, they're older. They're men, I guess.
Yeah.
They're like 20, early 30s, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I like seeing stories where the young heroes or adolescents grow up and take the mantles. I always enjoy stories like that, especially the DC universe with the Titans, especially.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan because Golden Age is kind of where it's at for me. I have a big affinity for legacy characters. Any character that becomes derived, either like a son or a sidekick or something that takes up the mantle of their mentor. I'm a big
You have
fan
any
of that.
Batman books or detective comic books where he's carrying a pistol?
I do. I mean, no, I don't have any of those because those are super, super expensive. But I do have this handy dandy Batman from the 30s to the 70s where you do have Batman. Let's see if I can find a good image of Batman with his pistol. There's a good one where Batman throws a bad guy into a vat of acid. Some pretty cool artwork and stuff. This book is long out of print, but they took a lot of these stories. You can find trade paperbacks pretty cheap. There's like Batman in the 40s, Batman in the 50s, Batman in the 60s, all the way up to the 80s. They did it for Superman as well, where they just collected some of the key stories from those decades. And again, pretty cheap. You can find them on Amazon. You can find them at comic book shops. So definitely check it out.
With all the Superman stories that you've read, like which one do you think which story arc would you think would make a good movie?
You know what? That's a good question. I would say Jeff Johns had a really good run in the mid 2000s, or I guess mid to late 2000s.
Is that Man in Tomorrow?
No, his run it started out where he kind of redid the origin of Superman, but he had a great Brainiac story. I mean, not Brainiac, Bizarro story, but then he also had a Brainiac story. They found some more Kryptonians, so there's a new Krypton is established on Earth, and
Is that a tiny city?
that was Kandor.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've read them, but I would say any Jeff Johns Superman is really, really good. I'm gonna pull it up on the old Google right now to get his bibliography real fast. So yeah, Superman. He started with Superman's Secret Origin, where he has a really kind of cool take on Superman's backstory. There are omnibuses of his run on Superman. So I would say any Superman by Jeff Johns, I think, is well worth your time to check out. But that is the saga of the Super Sons. This has been the first episode of the Funny Pages. Like I said, I'm still not sure what we're doing. Oh, yeah, World of New Krypton. It started out with Kandor. Yeah, great. Thank you, Frank. Frank Holman, if I'm not mistaken, Matt Holman's father.
Well, sir.
And I would say I got to give credit to Matt Holman, a really good friend of the theater, over on our Nerds of Comedy channel. He did an episode on the Nerds of Comedy where he talked about the indie comics that would make good movies. And like I said, I had kind of fallen out of comic books for a little bit, but seeing Matt's episode of that has started to really kind of get me back into the whole comic book vibe. He also said James Robinson Starman. I am so in love with James Robinson Starman. It's again goes back to that legacy heroes with the Starman being an original member of the Justice Society from the 1940s. So with this show, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about comic books and specifically ones that hold a lot of meaning for us. For me, the Super Sons were just something super fun and crazy. And when I started collecting comic books and found out about this, for me, it was the thrill of hunting down these comics without having the internet or anything like that to rely on. I kind of felt like a nerdy Indiana Jones sometimes every time I would come across.
Comics go like weird places, like the drugstore.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
I used to get, when I was first collecting, I'd get mine at 7-Eleven. Whenever we would go on vacation, I would always had my head on a swivel looking for places like antique stores, flea markets. Eventually, like in the mid 80s, when comic book stores started becoming a thing, I would always keep my head on a swivel when I was in the backseat of the car with my parents looking for comic book stores or strip malls, because you would always find, that's where comic books. So anytime we would pass by a strip mall, I would keep my eye out for places where I could go find comics. And I was the king of the quarter bins. A lot of places would have just boxes of comic books for $1, and I would spend hours going through these and coming up with really cool stuff.
That's work in itself, just digging through boxes like that.
Sometimes that's what you got to do.
Looking for my Avengers West Coast.
Oh, I got me some Avengers West Coast as well. So this has been the first episode of the Funny Pages. Ted, thank you so much for being my my very first guest.
Problem.
And muddling this through with this. Again, I really had no idea what I was doing when I decided to come up with this show, but like pure improv, you just kind of roll with it.
Thank you for doing it, because it's like a really exciting time to be, a comic book fan with everything going on. Like, I think they're rebooting DC again, the comic books.
Yeah. I would say I'm not as up to date with the current stuff as much. I've been the past year or so, as I've been getting back into it, just kind of cherry picking, going more off of artists and writers that I like, and just reading their arcs as opposed to diving headfirst back into all the continuities and stuff. But yeah, it is a really kind of fun time. It's always a fun time to be a comic books fan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always so much stuff, fun stuff that is out there.
We're accepted now.
Exactly. Well, that's true. We are accepted.
It's a lot different now. People used to, what are you reading, bro? X-Men? Now it's like pop culture. It's fun.
So I want to give a shout out to Matt Cole. Thank you very much, Matt Cole and Earprov, for running the tech end of this. The Push Comedy Theater. We have some really cool stuff coming your way at the Push Comedy Theater. This coming Sunday, Valentine's Day, we have a Getting to Know the Couple, a special Valentine's Day episode of Getting to Know the Couple. It'll be free online on the Push Comedy Theater Facebook page. We will be having some outdoor shows coming in March outside once the weather starts turning a bit nicer, very socially distant outdoor shows. And then last but not least, we have another online show that'll be coming your way very, very soon that I cannot talk about just yet, but it'll be involving improvisers from the Push Comedy Theater, as well as improvisers from Second City, the Improv Olympic, the Groundlings out in LA, and comedians from all over the country. So just keep your eye out on the Push Comedy Theater Facebook page, and also check out the Nerds of Comedy YouTube page. You can find out, if you go to YouTube, type up Nerds of Comedy. You can find comedians kind of nerding out on all their favorite things, particularly movies and TV shows. So this has been Funny Pages. Join us next week, next Thursday night at 9:00. The topic of that episode is Why I Hate Sandman. And our guest is going to be Kelly Vigilante. So it's going to be next week, 9:00, Why I Hate Sandman.
Because he's weak to Jell-O.
Is he weak to Jell-O?
Yeah, I have a book where Spider-Man puts Jell-O in his web shooters.
Not that Sandman.
Oh, not that Sandman?
No, the Neil Gaiman Sandman.
Okay.
I'm fine with that Sandman. And I'm fine with the Golden Age Sandman, but I have a big mad on for or hatred of the Neil Gaiman Sandman that everybody loves and they teach college courses about and stuff like that. But I'm going to save why I don't like the Sandman for next week. If you're a big Sandman fan, tune in next week and find out why I think you're wrong. This has been the Funny Pages. Thank you for joining us for our debut episode, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you and good night.
Thanks so much for listening and watching to Funny Pages, a comic book talk show. We'll see you next Thursday. There's also some fun shows on Earprov. Tomorrow night is Drunk Prov, the drunkest show on earth. You donate, we drink. And then Saturday, it's The Jam, an improv comedy live stream celebrating diversity and inclusion every second Saturday at 8 p.m. Let's jam. Give it up for Sean, Devereux, and Ted Cornista. See ya in the Funny Pages.